This video is to walk you through the Lenses and Images lab. Now, most of you were able to do part one, or at least have it explained to you. And remember, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that the laser is perfectly lined up so that it's pointing through the center of the light blue lens. And that's what I'm doing right here. The other thing to make sure is that the face of the laser is perfectly parallel with the line that you drew, so that it's always pointing perpendicular straight through the lens itself. Now here you can see I'm marking my data points. Where does the beam exit the laser? Where does it enter the lens? Where does it exit the lens? And where does it hit the block down at the end of my paper, which is off screen? And as I'm making these marks, you can see where the laser beam is shining on my pen. And the important thing is to make sure that your pen or pencil is lined up perfectly with the beam. Now I'm moving my laser slightly so that it's aimed just a little bit off center. I'm going to line it up so that the face is parallel to the laser line again, and make my marks. Exits the laser, enters the lens, exits the lens, and then hits the block at the end of the paper. And you'll do this for 5 different positions on the lens. 1 in the center, 1 off center on either side, and 1 on the outer edges. Now I've jumped ahead here a little bit, and I'm lining up to get my last set of data points. So I'm on the outside edge of the lens, and I'm marking where the beam comes out of the laser, enters the lens, exits the lens, and where does it hit the block down at the end of the paper. Now that I have all of my data points marked, I can move the lens out of the way. I can move the laser out of the way. And at this point, I'm going to connect my dots. So I'm going to trace in my incident ray. That's the one coming out of the laser and hitting the lens. And if you've lined it up correctly, all of your incident rays should be straight lines, just straight and parallel to the edge of the paper. And you can see here that as the light passes through the light blue lens, it bends. It bends toward the center of the lens. And I'm just going to trace in all the rest of the lines that I've marked. You can see that as I get closer to the center of the lens itself, it doesn't bend quite as much. And if you've lined it up perfectly, when you've aimed it right in the middle of the lens, then that center line should be a perfectly straight parallel line. As it passes through the very center of the lens, the light does not refract. Here's our 4th incident ray. And finally, the 5th incident ray, all the way out at the outer edge of the lens. And you can see obviously that they're all coming together at a general point, and we'll look at that in the analysis questions. What we're going to do now is move on to the dark blue lens. And you can see I'm pointing out the focal point, which we'll measure and do some things with here in a bit. First, we'll look at the dark blue lens. And you can see that I've already traced around the bottom of it, so I know exactly where to place my lens. I'm going to line up my laser one more time. Again, trying to get it to where it's pointing directly in the center. remembering always when you're moving your laser to move it straight up and down so that the face is always parallel to the laser line. And it's always pointing perpendicular to the lens itself. For this, I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did before. I want 5 beams in 5 different positions on the lens. So I'm going to make my marks here for the very first one, and then I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. So if you look closely, you can see I've got 2 marks now on the paper, and I'm lining up for a third. And jumping ahead one more time, now I'm lining up for my 5th and final beam through the dark blue lens. So I move my lens out of the way, move my laser. I've used 5 different colors, so it's very easy to tell which is which. And once again, your incident rays should be straight lines. They should be parallel to the edge of your paper. And then right away you can see that this one's behaving differently. Notice that my beam is still bending, but this time it's bending outward away from the center of the lens. And when we get to the analysis questions, we'll have to look in the other direction to see if we can find our focal point. I'm going to continue connecting my dots to trace the incident and refracted rays. Until I have all 5 connected. And I'll jump ahead a little bit more. And you can see here that I am tracing my 5th and final ray through the dark blue lens. And you can see that the 2 lenses obviously are behaving very differently, which should tell you something about what kind of lens they are. And one of your analysis questions tells you to find the focal point on your light blue lens. And the way that you do that is you look at where the lines come together. You may have one single point, or you may have multiple points. You can see me marking multiple different positions on my diagram here. And the best thing to do when that happens is to just find somewhere kind of in between. Find the outer edges and pick what you think is the best place in between. Get your ruler and you're going to measure from the lens line, so the center of the lens, to your marked focal point. Just going to label that here. There's my focal point. And my focal length for the light blue lens is 19.5 centimeters. And that's it.